disclosure, and I have it in bold or pink or something, that an individual with a disability may request a reasonable accommodation at any time during the application process or during the period of employment. And this, I think, is interesting because disclosure is kind of a fluid thing. It's not like a disclosure and a request for a reasonable accommodation is not like FMLA, where you have to be there so many quarters and months, and it's not like that. You can disclose and ask for an accommodation at any time from the interview to 10 years out when you need that accommodation. And an example, a real life example of this is I had a woman who called me and she had MS, and she was hired in the winter, did not need any accommodations. Summer comes and she realizes that her cubicle is about 90 degrees. So if you're familiar with anybody that has MS, oftentimes the individuals have an issue with heat fatigue. So by noon, she was done. She had to go home. So I worked with her and I said, so let's figure out a good accommodation. She said, she goes to the supervisor and says, can I get a small wall unit air conditioner in my cubicle, the window for my cubicle area? And they said, oh, no. You were less than honest with us. You didn't disclose at the time we hired you. So you weren't really honest with us, so we're not going to provide this accommodation. It was a very backwards thing. These stories I don't hear all the time. So we proceeded, and said, but, somebody with a disability can disclose and ask for accommodation at any time, and when you hired me, it was winter. So after some back and forth, realizing that perhaps that was maybe a little bit out of line for the individual to say, they got her the wall unit air conditioner. And lo and behold, production in that department increased by 30% because everybody cooled down to a regular body temperature. So I gotta say it was perfect. It was a win-win for me. This is kind of the ADA language, but the last little bullet is, as a practical matter, it may be in the employee's best interest to request a reasonable accommodation before performance suffers or conduct problems occur. So, it is in the best interest of the individual to, if they do see that there's an issue, to disclose prior to any disciplinary action. And if the person does have a hidden or invisible disability, and there's no way in the world that the employer may have any indication that the person has a disability, and they terminate them because of this, because their attendance was poor, and then the person comes in and says, but I have a disability, that person's a little bit out of luck because your employer can't be a mind reader. But if there's any indication that that person is struggling, it is the employer's obligation to then seek that individual out and say, is there something going on? Do we need some medical documentation? Do you need accommodation? See what I mean? But truly, if there's no way that person knows, we do say, though, to make sure that you separate disciplinary action and ADA accommodations and requests so that doesn't get intermingled. If there's a disciplinary action going on, you can't, and we've had it, unfortunately, say, well, we're not going to do that accommodation because you've been late 10 times to work. You really have to separate disciplinary action and ADA accommodation. You don't want to commingle those at all. Not a good idea. Really, with the EEOC, that will never really end well for you. So, confidentiality. All disclosure, detail, and requests for accommodations, all of everything. Like if somebody discloses they have a disability, they provide you medical documentation, you have a plan written up for accommodations, all that, which I do say probably it's best to have it in writing at some point. It has to be in a separate locked file, separate from that employee's personnel file. And people never understand why. It's because a lot of people have access to your personnel file, which I did not know. I would love to see some of my personnel files. I gotta tell you, I'm sure they're great. I can only imagine. But in any event, so let's say there's a supervisor from another department and they want to steal you, right? And all of a sudden they see, oh, but wait a minute, they have, I didn't know that they had this, and they didn't. I'm not, so you can't. It has to be in a separate locked file. And also, the information has to be shared on a need-to-know basis. So, like I had an individual who used an oxygen tank at home but did not use it at work because they did not want their coworkers to know. So they worked it out with this boss that they had a closer parking spot in the back of the building. So they gave that individual that closer parking spot so that she didn't have to walk long distances in the winter because of her respiratory issues. And so then the boss then sent an email out to everybody but did not copy her on it saying, don't think I'm giving unfair treatment to so-and-so. She names her disability, and that's why she gets that special spot. Not a good idea. It did not go well. And then also appropriate response to inquiring colleagues. And this is very important for employers, and I actually sympathize with you sometimes, especially if it's a union situation where somebody says, they call me and they say, I don't know what to do. Everybody thinks I'm showing favoritism to X, Y, and Z. Or somebody says, oh, they think I have something special going on with this person. I know I can't disclose they have a disability. I'm stuck. And I said, no, what you need to say is, and I would suggest maybe you want to use this, that, just as your information is confidential, we are keeping this employee's information confidential, but just so you know, we're complying with the federal law. Okay? You don't say what federal law, but a federal law, because many federal laws would be appropriate. What you cannot say, and I have many people ask this, well, can I tell them it's the ADA federal law? Well, no, because then you're disclosing that the person has a disability. To me, it was a no-brainer, but apparently not. So you can't say it's the ADA, but you just say I'm complying with the federal law, and then that should be it. And then end of discussion and move on. Affirmative action. So here's what Carol basically has asked me to talk about. I finally got there, right? I always do. So again, there's some confusion that, how can you talk about is the individual's right to, if they choose to disclose, but we're asking them on affirmative action. Well, you can ask an individual to self-identify voluntarily, and I think that is the key word here. That, and I think it kind of says there that an employer may invite an applicant to voluntarily self-identify for purposes of the employer's affirmative action program if the employer is undertaking affirmative action because of a federal, state, or local law, and veterans, and also that they're using it for the benefit of the person with the disability. You're not using this information to screen them out because you don't want to hire somebody with a disability. You are using this as a tool to incorporate people with disabilities or women or people of color, whatever, into your employment situation. I found it really interesting. I actually did a training this week, actually, for the state supervisors, and somebody said, what about the state has this thing called Resume Builder? Are you guys familiar with this? I've never applied for a state job. Resume Builder?
Resumes.
I'm not familiar with that. Actually, the guy pulled it up on his phone. And then, of course, I took the readers because I couldn't read the guy's phone. But and anybody does ask you on this, this resume builder, are you a person with a disability? What is your race? Whatever. Then I said, wait a minute, back that up a few screens, and it said, this is voluntary information. I think that was the state's affirmative action request, is what I think. I have to look into that a little bit more. Maybe somebody here could do that for me. But I think that was their affirmative action because we backed it up. And I said, oh, no, here's where it says this is voluntary information and this is what it's being used for. So I think we cleared that up. But that was an interesting way for the state to do their affirmative action plan so that we can have more individuals with disabilities working for the state, which is our goal. Absolutely. Are there any special steps? Well, yeah, to take it to if the employer invites the applicant to voluntarily self-identify in connecting with providing affirmative action, they have to state clearly on any written questionnaire or orally that it's solely in connection with affirmative action and that it's being used on a voluntary basis and that will be kept confidential in a separate log file. It has to be like on a separate sheet, actually, is what we say, that it should be that the image on a form that is kept separate from the application. So it's oftentimes on the back side or the back sheet or a separate sheet so that when it gets passed on to many people up the ladder, all it says basically is you have a pool, and in this pool you have some individuals with disabilities, but it won't say what the disability is or anything like that. But it has to be a separate thing. It can't be the actual application. You can never have on an application, I can't say this enough, are you a person with a disability? Or any which way that would force you to disclose that you have a disability. I just recently saw an application form somebody sent me, and it listed the essential job functions, and then had little boxes next to it, and then it says, check here if you need an accommodation to do this job. So who needs an accommodation to do a job? That would be people with disabilities. So they've asked them to disclose, but in not really the best way, kind of out of compliance, in my opinion. But again, I'm not an attorney. I think we have some here that could answer that better. So in any event, affirmative action in the ADA, the key to this is that, yes, they are compatible, especially when the end result is the same, and that's hiring and retaining people with disabilities in the workforce. So you have the actual, it's probably written this big on your sheet, right? So blow it up at home. So national resources, EEOC, a great resource. Job Accommodation Network, cannot speak highly of them. Office of Disability and Employment Policy, great resource. EEOC, here's just some additional resources that a colleague of mine in Chicago has shared, that he's been very successful in sharing this information. And I am at ADA Minnesota, but I always warn people, I am the only employee there. So if you like what I had to say and you think you can connect with me, absolutely, please call. If not, just know, I'm just warning you, I am the one that answers the phone. So that being said, we'll wait for questions, and I'm going to introduce Steve Coos, who was the individual actually who kind of got the ball rolling for me to be here today. So thank you for indulging me.